What's good, YouTube? Today I have my camera and we're gonna go over how to take a photo and the best settings for taking your photo. And guess what? The answer is it depends. What I want to cover basically today is the settings or what configurations on your camera determine how your picture looks and how changing these settings affects your photo. A typical DSLR or mirrorless camera that you can buy online or at any store has three settings that operate in a triangle, and they each give certain trade-offs depending on how they're set. The three settings are ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. The first thing is one you may have heard of is the shutter speed. That's how quickly the camera is opening and closing, or how fine of a picture you get. So the higher a shutter speed, here I'll zoom in on the camera, the shutter speed is right here. Right here. And if I change that, it actually won't show you. I can change that, and what that will do is it will take a finer picture the lower it is. So if it's 1/60, that means it's taking a picture in 1/60th of a second. If I change it to 3 seconds, what it's doing is it's taking in all the light from its viewpoint for 3 seconds and taking that into a picture. You may want to make it abnormally long if you're taking nature photography, or for instance taking a picture of the moon, because the moon is so far away you need to wait for the light to come down from the sky so your camera can pick it up. Okay, but most of the time, if you were doing something that was really quick and you didn't want a blurry image, saying you were taking pictures of someone playing soccer, playing any sport, you would want the shutter speed to be really high, 1/250, for example, 1/400, so you could get a very clear image of the character or the actor moving very quickly with the ball and everything else. But if you kind of want that blurred image, you may want to find some middle ground where you can at least see what's going on, but it looks like a blurred kick or a blurred action, such as like 1/100, 1/80, 1/120. Again, photography is an art. You can mess with the settings to get the best configuration you want. The second thing, and also really important if you're taking portraits, and probably the setting I think about the most, is aperture. So aperture on my Canon R5, by the way, is this middle setting, and what it is how big or how small the lens is, and it kind of works inverted. So the smaller an aperture is, so when you see an aperture at 2.2 or 1.8, I believe the minimum aperture for this lens is 4, that means that the lens is really big and it lets in more light. And so the more light it lets in, the more detailed the image is. But the detail is sacrificed usually at the perception focus. So what that means is that you get a very detailed image, but at the same depth. So for instance, I can't take a very detailed image of a depth at 4 feet and also a depth at 20 feet. If I wanted equal depths or the trade-off, I would set the aperture, I would move the aperture up to maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, and see if I can get equal depth, equal focus on both of them. So the aperture can determine focus. The lower you make the aperture, the more detailed the image will be, but the more focused it will be on the set distance, usually a close-up shot. It's really good to have a small aperture, and check your lenses when you buy your lenses. The lenses are very important because they say what the minimum aperture is, and that determines the detail of the photo you can take. So usually I have one lens for general, which is what this lens is, and I have another lens for portrait shots that has a very low aperture that can get a very precise shot of just the front of their body, which doesn't have much depth to it. Okay, and the other setting is ISO, which you see here in the bottom right. I have it, set to auto right now, but what this determines essentially is the lighting. So what I'm gonna show you here, because it actually will show in the lens here, is I'm going to increase the ISO, and then I'm going to decrease the ISO. So here you can see me steadily increasing it, and you can see how black the image is until it gets to a very high ISO. The ISO is at 10,000, and then I can decrease the ISO when it gets black. So what ISO does is it adds additional lighting to your portrait, to your photo. But this comes at a trade-off. the higher your ISO, I would say, probably with today's modern cameras, anything above 400, it adds a little bit of grain. It adds a little bit of sacrifice in quality. So if I took a picture at 10,000 ISO, you would notice considerable grain. I'll put some photos of demonstrations of ISO up in the photo here. Okay. So again, if you have a camera, make sure you charge your battery, make sure you have a memory card in it, and then experiment with how to change the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed, and make sure you figure out what's best for you. Make sure you know, like, hey, if you're doing, an activity, a sport, you probably want the shutter speed to be high, but that may come at the trade-off of, the aperture being high as well, because you want to get that depth. Or if you are, taking pictures at night, you may have a high ISO, and that may sacrifice some quality because you want your pictures to be lighter and you don't have much light outside. Also, obviously, there are external things to consider, such as lighting you can control outside of just this camera. One thing you can use is flash. This is a GoMix flash I got off Amazon. It's $100. It served me well. It takes double 4A batteries that lasts a while. There's a lot of Godox cameras on Amazon. Maybe I'll link this below. Again, you can just Google it. And so it's important to always consider light. For instance, let me show you guys, to film this video, I have a lot of external lighting because this room isn't well lit. Let me show you guys. I've got this lens, this right here, and right here. You can see on my camera is having trouble picking up the extra light outside, and I also have the windows going on. So it's very important to consider external elements as well as just your camera when figuring out lighting. Have a great day, guys.